Let me ask you a question. What's the most immersive horror game that you've ever played? Not the scariest, not the one with the best graphics, the most immersive. I recently discovered Scavenger SV4, and it may be one of the most unique games that I've ever played. It puts multiple interesting design ideas into practice in one game, and it's all the more impressive that this was done by a single indie developer. What I like most about the game is that it illustrates a really interesting point about game design and immersion. If ever there was an example of why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, or in this case, a game by its graphics, this would be it. Scavenger SV4 implements something fascinating into its design that even AAA development studios could learn from. To explain what this is, I'm going to talk you through a typical run in Scavenger SV4. Before I start, note that you will see some of the gameplay and unique experiences that the game has to offer in this video, but since every run is different, you can still play the game and have your own unique experiences. This is a roguelike where every start is randomized in terms of your starting character, their backstory, and what you can encounter on the planet that you'll be exploring. Even in the most peaceful runs of Scavenger SV4, there's always tension. You can never be quite sure what to expect. This particular run is a little less peaceful than most. In this run, we are playing as Tara Simpson. As we arrive at the planet, we read her logs on the bunk terminal and find out that an old friend of hers contacted her and requested that she travel to these coordinates. Her friend recommended bringing a ship outfitted with a surface rover and an autodock that can treat radiation. After reading through the logs, we head off to the helm terminal to connect to the rover and launch it to the planet. The display screens are completely customizable. We swap out the display output from the compass for the auxiliary generator. The compass is represented on the survey map anyway, and I'd like to be able to see how much fuel we have left in the generator when switching it on. As the rover makes its way towards the surface of the planet, we can start to see a lot of interference on the video feed. This makes it difficult to tell exactly what we're looking at. On the camera feed, we can make out some kind of ruin or wreckage straight ahead. We pilot the rover towards it. Using the manipulator arms, we pick up a loose object by the ruins. This is a big part of the core loop in Scavenger SV4, finding objects that we can pick up and fly back to the ship for research, either to repurpose on the rover or to keep as something to sell as part of the endgame. We continue making our way towards tall objects in the distance. They look like trees, but it's hard to say for sure. There are electrical shocks coming off of these structures, or at least that's what it seems like from what we're getting through the microphone and camera feed. Hard to say for sure if these are harmful to the rover, but we're not going to stick around to find out. After some more exploring, we find what appears to be a pod of some sort. To the left of the pod, there appears to be a drone. The battery is running low, so we switch on the auxiliary generator to increase the rover's power output. This is a great way to quickly recharge the battery, but it does make a fair amount of noise, which can make it difficult to avoid unwanted attention. After recharging the battery and salvaging another object, we move to the left of the pod to investigate the drone. It opens fire as we approach. It's clearly still active and hostile. We head in another direction since we have nothing mounted on the turret. If we're going to fight this thing, we'll need to find some weapons first. Through the rover's microphone, we can hear shots landing right beside our rover as we're trying to move away from the hostile drone. We salvage another object from another structure to fill up the last open slot in our rover's cargo. With shots still falling beside our rover, we recall the rover and it immediately takes off and starts its journey from the planet's surface back to our ship. This is a good opportunity for a bit of a break. We head over to the medbay to activate the autodock. This will allow us to see how much radiation we've taken on so far. There's some cellular damage, which is to be expected. Current dose is at 486, but we can get that down to 126 with some treatment. This is another one of the core mechanics in the game, which keeps runs relatively short and, in my opinion, interesting. There's no avoiding radiation, but the longer you stay, the more you'll eventually take on, even with regular treatments. So you'll have to constantly weigh the risk of staying longer and potentially discovering more in order to set yourself up with a good career, retirement, or some kind of life after the mission. Stay for too long, and whatever wealth or reputation you have to gain may come at the cost of poor health or worse. After hanging around in the cargo bay for a bit, we see the rover entering through the cargo bay doors. We do a bulk unload of the rover, and like I always do, I send my new cargo straight to the science lab. This time, however, something other than the cargo containers is offloaded. I can't quite tell if it's organic, mechanical, or both. I'm pretty sure it's dangerous. It seems to be headed for the cargo duct, so we immediately start closing doors to keep Tara safe. I'm not actually sure what to do, but I head for the engineering department since there's a number of ship status displays to use. Hopefully one of these will be useful in dealing with the alien. Cycling through the status displays, I notice there's an obstruction warning and I can clearly see the alien moving towards the storage bay, which also happens to contain the EVA suits and airlock. I was actually hoping to put on the EVA suit, not that I had any idea whether that would be able to protect me. Anyway, that was no longer an option. We watch the cargo duct in the storage bay for a few minutes as I can hear the alien trying to force its way out. On the one hand, I want to continue my work because with every passing minute we're taking on more radiation. On the other hand, I want to keep an eye on the alien because I definitely don't want it loose in the ship without me knowing where it is. Eventually it breaks out into the storage bay. It's sitting on the door, watching us. Whatever it wants to do, I'm betting we won't like it. Luckily it is right next to the airlock. We can remotely open the airlock and get the alien sucked out of the ship as it rapidly decompresses. After opening the airlock doors, we turn around immediately to see if we can see it being sucked out of the airlock, but it's gone. I have to assume that it was rapidly ejected from the ship. Well, either that or it was hanging on to... Actually, let's not get hung up on the alternative. I have no idea if it can survive a vacuum. I really don't care either, as long as I can seal it outside the ship. We seal the airlock and repressurize the airlock and storage area. We have to assume that it was successfully ejected out of the airlock. I mean, I'm not going to check. On the off chance that that thing is still in there, I'll avoid the storage area for now. For all we know, it's a death sentence being in the same room of it, and I'm not risking Tara's story to satisfy my curiosity about the creature. While all of this was going on, the cargo bay's terminal stopped working. We head back to engineering and use the system overview to do a force reboot. Meanwhile, the science lab is also finished researching the other two objects we picked up from the planet's surface. It turns out it was an arc projector and a pulse laser. We'll send these over to the garage along with the rover. The garage terminal provides a technical analysis of the rover, including its power situation, thermal situation, and maneuverability. We remove the status display to free up some space. It's useful at times, but we can make do without it. This allows us to install the arc projector to give the rover some offensive capability, while still keeping 3 cargo slots open for scavenging. After the installation finishes, we launch the rover back to the planet directly from the garage terminal. As the rover exits the cargo bay, we move the status display and pulse laser modules over to the storage area. The main terminal shows that the screen that used to show the status display currently has no signal. So we link the compass to this blank output while the rover is making its descent towards the planet's surface. The hostile drone that we previously encountered starts opening fire before we even reach the surface. Now that we have a weapon installed, it's time to head back and face the drone head on. We try to avoid the drone's attacks by circling it while hitting it with the arc projector. It doesn't come without a cost though, as it manages to damage several systems on board the rover. It seems that there's another hostile drone behind it. This is proving to be slightly more challenging than initially anticipated. Eventually we do damage both drones. We head over to the destroyed drones to salvage what we can. There's still one more cargo slot open on the rover, so we'll explore a bit before recalling the rover to our ship. We do manage to salvage another object, although it is painfully slow with the damaged manipulator arms. Speed is a factor here, because remember that every moment spent in close proximity to the planet means more radiation exposure. Once more we recall the rover and directly head back to the med bay to assess the radiation exposure we've had and try to mitigate any negative effects. We head back to the main terminal, and as the rover is approaching our ship, I notice that the auxiliary generator is still running, so we disable it. I wonder what happened to that alien. We use the rover to see if there's anything from outside of the ship. there doesn't seem to be any sign of it. I'm 99% sure it's just floated off somewhere into space. The 1% chance that it didn't, I guess that's what keeps it interesting. This time we closely monitored the cargo being unloaded before sending it to the science lab. If there was one of these aliens on that planet, it's pretty safe to assume that there would be more. After making sure all the cargo is harmless, we send it to the science lab and start the first phase of research to figure out what we found. Next up, we head over to the garage to start doing repairs on the rover. Repairing the standard equipment is pretty straightforward. The same can't be said about the F-62 arc projector. Since it's a newly found alien weapon, there's a good chance that we'll end up further damaging it while attempting repairs. We're gonna take a stab at it anyway. The first repair on the arc projector failed, so we give it another go. We also send over the pulse laser to the garage in case the arc projector can't be fixed. As it turns out, that is unfortunately the case. A catastrophic failure destroyed the arc projector during repairs, so we'll be installing the pulse laser in its place. We sent the rover back to the planet. Over the next couple of visits, it becomes a little bit easier to identify new objects. Since we've done quite a bit of research already, it means that we're able to at least partially identify objects that we've been salvaging. This also cuts future research times. We continue to explore a good amount of the planet's surface. Unfortunately, we keep running into hostile drones, much more so than I've seen during other playthroughs. During one of these encounters, we sustain heavy damage to the video camera and survey map, in addition to a number of other systems. This forces us to recall the rover and spend a substantial amount of time repairing the various systems. More time running repairs means more radiation exposure while we stay close to this heavily radiated planet. While fixing up the rover, we swap out the auxiliary generator for a solar collector. It provides sufficient power, doesn't use fuel, and it doesn't make any noise, so we can pretty much keep it switched on all the time. We also install an active jammer since all our weapon systems are damaged. Hopefully this will keep the hostile drones from doing too much damage to the rover. The jammer seems to work, not particularly well, but it's better than nothing. Unfortunately, it also seems to be interfering with our output display, so that makes it even more difficult to use the camera feed. After being relentlessly hunted by a flying drone with no way to fight back, our rover is hit again. This time we lose the active jammer completely and our solar collector takes damage as well. It's time to call it. We've explored plenty of this planet's surface already, and we don't have a good way to take care of the various threats that's continuously causing damage and hindering our progress. We call the rover for the last time and take one more visit to the medbay. Following that, we strap in and leave the planet behind for good. This wasn't the best run I've seen, but definitely not the worst either. All things considered, it's a reasonably happy ending for Tara Wilson. She made enough from the sale of alien treasures she recovered to set herself up with a decent retirement. Tara achieved fame due to the various details she recorded from the planet, the alien artifact she discovered, and the alien encounter that she survived. She had to hire an agent to sift through the constant stream of interview requests and paid guest appearances that she was offered. The awards and keynote appearances seem to have no end. She grants a few of them every now and then, if the price is right or if the cause is worthwhile. That brings us to the end of one of the many stories that I've experienced in Scavenger SV4. There's no doubt that some AAA game studios believe that immersion is achieved through high-resolution graphics and high visual fidelity. That belief may be true in some cases, but I found that more often than not, it's not the case. The interesting thing is that the retro art style and basic graphics of Scavenger SV4 actually works to its advantage. The basic 3D models combined with the static from the video camera makes it difficult to know exactly what you are looking at on the surface of the planet. This is where your imagination kicks in, because especially early on in the game it's hard to tell what an object is when you approach it. Most objects on the surface of the planet will be harmless, but of course that's not always going to be the case. When something is dangerous, it's difficult to know how dangerous it is and in what way it could be a threat to your drone, and to you as the player. This is a great way to build tension, mystery, and ultimately immersion in a game. To further add to this tension, the outcome of a given story is not predetermined. This is a huge advantage that games like this have over traditional linear stories. because in a traditional story, the protagonist is going to live or die no matter what you do. All player agency is stripped away, which removes all tension from subsequent playthroughs. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Alien Isolation is an interesting game, but it's a different kind of tension. As good as linear stories can be, ultimately your decisions don't carry any real weight. I'm less concerned about Amanda Ripley, because dying is meaningless beyond having to replay the exact same content. The outcome has already been determined, no matter how many times you succeed or fail along the way. This is obviously not the case of Scavenger SV4. Your actions matter, and you will ultimately determine the fate of your character. It makes every decision feel deeper and more meaningful. If Tara Simpson died, that would be it. I could restart the game, I could create a character with the same name and try again, but it wouldn't be the same character. It would be a different character with a different backstory, visiting a different planet. It's brilliant. As an interesting side note, Scavenger SV4 also doesn't seem to suffer from ludonarrative dissonance. If you've never heard this term before, ludonarrative dissonance refers to the conflict between gameplay and narrative. One example of this is how in Tomb Raider, Lara Croft is emotionally distraught after having to kill a person. This is clearly the first time she's ever been in that situation, yet minutes later you are killing countless people like a psychopath in a way that would only make sense if she's been a trained assassin for years leading up to that point. Ludonarrative dissonance is often unavoidable because developers and gamers want their games to be fun, and sometimes it's difficult to find a fun gameplay loop that fits with a compelling storyline. In contrast to most other games out there, Scavenger SV4's gameplay seems to be mostly consistent with the stories that it tells. This is yet another aspect that makes it such a unique and immersive experience. So it should be pretty clear at this point that I would recommend this game. Maybe not to everyone. It's a very unique game and I think you need a powerful imagination to appreciate it for what it is. It's basically Duskers, but in first person with the player physically represented in the world. So if you like Duskers, there's a good chance that you'll like Scavenger SV4. The game is highly replayable, but for most people, I don't think it's infinitely replayable. You'll probably play it for 5 to 10 hours, and at that point, you would have experienced a lot of what the game has to offer. That's not a bad thing though. The pacing in the game is great, and I appreciate that this developer respects the player's time. I'd much rather have a shorter but meaningful experience than play something that's been artificially padded out to last 100 hours. Before we wrap up, I want to say a quick thank you to those of you that recommended this game to me in the comments. I wouldn't have experienced this hidden indie gem otherwise, and I'd love to feature more games like this in the future. So thank you, and please keep those recommendations coming. That wraps up my thoughts on Scavenger SV4. If you liked this video and you would like to see more similar content in the future, do like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video.